The Wolong Fallen Dynasty DLC is here. I think it's pretty solid. You're going to get 3 main campaigns and then 5 sub-campaigns. And in this DLC, you're going to get new weapons, new armor, a new Divine Beast, and 6 boss fights. And these 6 boss fights are going to range from really easy, in my opinion, to really, really challenging. I really feel like the bosses found in the main campaign battlefields were pretty challenging, with the last one being an absolute nightmare at times, especially because it's been a long time since I played this game. And in this video, I'm going to show the boss fights. I'm going to show a couple of my losses, some of the dumb things that I did, and then I'm going to show you some of my wins. Some of these I really clutched with like the skin of my teeth. Literally no health left. Let's dive right in. The first boss you go up against in the main campaign is Shu Chu. And this fight, in my opinion, is not that difficult. He does have a number of really easy tells. However, he does have the ability to go into this unblockable attack and immediately go into another unblockable, which absolutely will punish you. But I think for the most part, his tells are pretty easy. It's just I get overly aggressive when I fight some of these bosses because I feel like I'm not doing enough damage. I feel like that's just the way it is with all Wolong bosses. But it's very important for you to close that gap pretty quickly, because if you don't, he will. One of the things that Shu Chu does that's really frustrating is that he'll strike the ground and he'll have this AoE burst attack, and then sometimes he'll do that and then flip immediately away. So let's say you're getting into the groove of the fight, you watch him do that, you parry into it, you give him a couple follow-up attacks, the next time he does it, he separates himself and then he runs to the side and just starts throwing rocks at you. And believe me, those rocks can do a ton of damage. But the reason why I say that this fight is actually pretty easy is because there's a variation of him in the sub battlefields that I think is incredibly tough, because the things that they add to his kit are incredibly frustrating. What you're gonna have to tell yourself the entire time while you're going through this fight is that you have to parry into his attacks. Don't dodge backwards, don't dodge to the side. You're gonna wanna parry in, because he will have windows of vulnerability. I liked using the dual swords in the second fight because I feel like his aggression, I had to really match that. But it doesn't really matter what weapon you use, but you're going to have to parry forward. If you don't parry forward, you're going to struggle a lot. Do not let him get away from you. Do not let him just dash close to you. And remember, most of all, if he goes into his unblockable attack, you're going to want to dodge into that, strike him once or twice, do not mash it out, and then let him follow up with his other unblockable. Therefore, you can maximize that posture damage. Overall, I think this is a really solid intro fight because it does prepare you for the other battles. I really feel like against most humans in Wolong, I think these are usually the easiest. There's not much variation. There's nothing really around you like the Lu Bu fight, which I absolutely hated. But this fight here, I think it's just really fun because he does have a really nice diverse kit. And on top of that, I don't think he's unfair. Not until you get to that sub fight. And then when we get to that one, we'll talk about it more. Next up, the second boss of the Wolong DLC is the General of Heaven's Illusion. So this one, I would say, is probably the easiest of the 3 in the main campaign. And the reason why I'm saying that is that because this boss has some really, really easy tells. Now, the thing that's probably going to frustrate you your first time in is that you're going to see him summon some minions, and some of these minions can just pretty much cast magic from a distance, and they're just really there to harass you. I don't really think they're too threatening because after a while they disappear, which is really appreciated, because imagine trying to fight this boss with 2 to 3 other enemies just trying to swarm you the entire time, mainly shooting projectiles from a distance and preventing you from focusing on the boss. The easiest way to deal with the minions is to keep your distance. Basically what's going to happen is that the moment you start to separate, you're going to notice that the minions are just going to sit back, throw some projectiles at you. Some of them won't reach you, but you're going to see that the boss, instead of opting in to just kind of throw projectiles themselves, will try to dive at you and close that gap. Every time they close the gap with that punch attack or that dive attack, seriously, parry into it, follow up with some heavy damage. If you want to go for some spirit damage, do so. But I promise you that this is a really easy boss in comparison to the others, because almost all of its tells are just these long, huge swipes. Now, the only one that's probably going to do some damage or at least be threatening is when he kind of drives his arm back and then plunges it immediately forward. When he does that, you're going to have to be a little bit patient. Don't just mash your dodge or your parry. What you're going to want to do is wait to the very last second, parry into it, You're going to follow up with some great spirit damage. Then afterwards, punish. It's not that difficult of a fight if you just keep your distance from the ads and force the boss to come to you. I thought it was a pretty solid second fight, but honestly the easiest of the main campaign. The last boss of the main campaign DLC is Mr. Wei, and yeah, I'm going to call him Mr. Wei because he beat the absolute crap out of me and made me respect him. So listen, if you thought the first 2 fights of this campaign DLC were not difficult in the slightest, you will change your mind with this one. You're going to learn very quickly that Mr. Wei has a very diverse skill set, and it's probably one of the most frustrating boss fights because the moment you start to get into an opening, the moment you think you're starting to get into a groove, he will do a wake-up attack to knock you back, he will close the distance, and you are going to have to learn very quickly to just play as patient as possible. Do not worry about the damage you are doing. Focus on the spirit damage, because if you don't, if you get too greedy, if you get too desperate, you are going to lose. Because the moment you start doing a lot of damage, he's going to fly away. He's going to throw electrical tornadoes at you. He's going to shoot lightning bolts at you. He's going to shoot orbs at you. And then he might follow that up with an unblockable that you're going to have to parry into. Because if you don't parry into it, he's going to do a ton of damage and potentially could kill you if you're not using any magical armor. And by the way, you're going to have to parry that unguardable magic attack twice. And I really feel like if you just play patient the entire time and you don't play desperate and you don't get too frustrated, because believe me, the first couple times when you fight Mr. Wei, he's going to put you in a corner. And if you get caught up at the beginning of the stage at that entrance, the camera is going to screw you over and you're going to get killed and you're going to be very frustrated because that's a very cheap way to die. The second phase of his fight is honestly just more of the same, except that he has swords and far more follow-ups and is incredibly aggressive. The tornadoes are more frequent. His unguardable lightning attack is more frequent. And that attack, by the way, has to be parried 3 times, so be prepared. I will say that even though he has more follow-ups, by this point in time, you should be comfortable with guarding and parrying. You're going to want to, once again, parry into this boss and then find your openings. In the second phase, he does not get as tired as he does in the first phase. And if you happen to get him to stagger and you follow up with that spirit attack, just know that his wake up can be far more devastating. This is probably the one boss in the entire main campaign of the DLC that can do a ton of damage and potentially one-shot you. So be careful. Do not get greedy in this phase. I legitimately, I think, had no health left. But I think that was primarily because I was just tired at that point and just looking to match this demon blow for blow. Now, here's the deal. When you are fighting this monster, the one thing you're going to have to realize very quickly is that the moment he goes up into the air and comes out for that super dive, it is going to take time before it reaches you. You're going to want to parry it. And listen, you're going to want to get that timing down, because normally I tell people, like, look, if you see him up in the air, just kind of back up, let him hit the ground a little bit. Maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to get out of the shockwave. But in this case, you're going to want to parry, because I really think that the timing is fairly easy. But I will say this, regardless, his weapons are going to be electrified. It's going to do more damage, which is, by the way, and another thing you have to pay attention to. But if you are patient and you work on your timing, you will win. And it's just one of the most satisfying feelings, because if you can see, I had no health and no healing. And I was literally just screaming at this point, because holy crap, this fight was something. With the main campaign DLC bosses out of the way, let's talk about the sub-campaign bosses. There are 3 in all, and the first 2, in my opinion, are actually really easy. And I say that because the first 2 fights, everyone is really staggerable, and you can have some pretty easy tells. You can be as aggressive as you want, and you will not be punished for it, in my opinion, but that does not apply to Shoot You. But listen, Mr. Wei is back, and you get to exact your revenge on him. How great is that? I feel like this fight, like most human fights in Wolong, are pretty easy, primarily because even after you happen to break their posture and follow up with this major damage, they usually go out and they pull out their Divine Beast, but the Divine Beast in this case doesn't really do much, it just electrifies his weapons. After that, you can just follow up and just continue fighting the way you always have. If you want to just play patient, you can do so, but I was as aggressive as possible with my follow-ups, because I knew that if I let him get into a rhythm, if I let him pull out some of his major combos, I was going to take a lot of damage. And yes, you can take a lot of damage here, but honestly, if you just play aggressively and just work on damaging their spirit posture, you're going to be just fine. Honestly, I really felt like this fight was really trivial, and it's a nice reprieve, honestly. It's like a gift from the developers who knew that you more than likely struggled in his enhanced form. So now, you can bring the fight to him and just never let him get up. And you just feel good about yourself because holy crap, did he give you a ton of problems. The second boss fight of the sub-campaign is a gank fight. And it's not too difficult as it is annoying. So here's the deal. When you are fighting this boss, you're going to know almost immediately to clear out the ads. They don't have a lot of health, but they are distracting, and the boss will constantly try to stick with you. If you happen to continuously do damage to the boss, what they like to do at first is kind of throw some of these poison orbs at you, and usually they'll just kind of linger around. Really easy to parry, really easy to dodge out of the way of. Now, as you continue to progress into the fight and you break his posture for the first time and you do a follow-up attack, what's going to happen is that he's going to wake up and he's going to shoot out this poison orb. And this orb is going to float around in the area that you're in, and it's going to create this mist. And that mist is going to sit there for a little bit. It's actually really frustrating. I honestly thought you could just kind of parry it and get out of the way, but when I saw it, I was like, I need to get out of dodge because I'm going to take continuous poison damage. And as you know, in this game, when you are poisoned, it can be pretty devastating. Otherwise than that, the fight is pretty standard. Just make sure you are aggressive in your follow-ups. Make sure you're trying to always actively work to break their posture. Make sure you are dodging and parrying as often as possible. I really feel like his tells are really easy as well. I think there's not really any unguardable that is too frustrating, except for the ones where he has a kind of a delay in which he does a really quick circular slash, but the draw is pretty slow at first, so you really have to work on your timing on that. Beyond that though, I really felt like this fight was really easy. I was kind of stunned too because I really thought that maybe, because I've never even seen this character, maybe that this boss was going to have something completely new in terms of its skill set, but it really just felt like a normal human fight. Just make sure that you do not get overly aggressive, because if you try to do a follow-up too quickly in regards to your spirit attack, sometimes you'll just miss completely. But if you drive him into a corner, literally, he doesn't do anything. He just takes it and just absolutely gets murdered. It's really entertaining. I don't think this fight is difficult at all. It's just annoying because at the beginning, you're more than likely going to take some really cheap shots, especially from the archer, who is probably the first enemy that you should absolutely target and kill, because the other one is just a standard foot soldier. I don't think that this fight should take you too long. I'm pretty sure if you are a veteran of Wolong or a veteran of a lot of Souls-likes, this is probably going to be one of the easiest fights you have in this game. And I also think that you're just going to be annoyed the entire time because this character does like to slip away from your spirit attacks, especially when you do your follow-ups. But beyond that though, most people should be able to beat this boss on their first or second try. The final boss fight in the sub-campaign, the final boss fight in the DLC, is probably going to be a very frustrating fight. I think it's the second hardest, primarily because Mr. Chu is back, and he is an absolute monster because he now has a Divine Beast, and he does not stagger. So you are going to have to be as aggressive as possible when you start out, because the attacks from him are devastating, and they feel like they can go on forever. He has some crazy chains, and I feel like for whatever reason, they just kind of sped him up. If you're a Dark Souls fan, it's just like going from Udix Gundyr to Champion Gundyr. That's essentially what this fight is. And if you did not take him seriously in that first fight, you are going to take him seriously here, because he is going to throw out some crazy aggressive strings at you. He is going to throw his Divine Beast at you multiple times. And it is one of those things where if he throws a tornado at you, more than likely he's going to follow up with a charge attack or a projectile, or he can even get up close and just start throwing his hammer around. And you're gonna ask yourself, what did I do to deserve this? And honestly, it's your fault because you decided to pick this game back up, just like me. So here's the boss strat. It's just like the original fight, but you're going to have to time your attacks accordingly. Still, dodge into the attacks. It will result into these parries. Even when he's doing that crazy windup where he's throwing his hammer around his head, even that, dodge into it. Because after the 8th or 9th strike, he's going to have a pretty nice window open where you can do some damage. If you do not dodge into his attacks, if you go left or right or back, you are just leaving space, and you do not want to leave space with this boss. As you whittle down the boss's health and you get to that second phase of the fight, they're always going to have that moment where they stop and they have that big charge up where they start to release Divine Beast energy. What you want to do in that moment is activate your Divine Beast. You'll notice that it interrupts his activation and it also staggers him. If you are using the Divine Beast that grants a healing AoE, you are probably at the point where you want to be as aggressive as possible when you start your attack. You are going to want to stay in that area of that healing effect though, because if you don't, you are more than likely going to take a lot of damage in this phase. But this is where you start to trade damage, and this is where you start to punish heavily. Because you're going to notice that he is just following up with some insane speed. It really feels like there's little to no gap in regards to his attack pattern, but as long as you continue to press your attack, as long as you continue to time your parries, you will come out victorious. And I really enjoyed this fight. I did. I thought it was incredibly challenging. I thought the original fight was great, but I thought this fight was masterful, primarily because this really played with your expectations when going into most human fights, because in your head you're thinking, well, I can stagger almost every human, and most of those fights are pretty trivial. But here, you cannot stagger, and that level of aggression is ratcheted up, so you're going to have to be on your toes the entire time, because if you're lazy with any of your dodges or your parries, you're more than likely going to die. And no, your eyes didn't deceive you. I just tried to shoot this man twice with an arrow because I was pretty much in panic mode. I tried to get really greedy at the end, ended up trying to follow attacks on the ground. He got up, did some big damage, and I knew in my head that he was going to kill me. But I came out on top anyway, and I'm going to say this. I think this is a really good way to top off their DLC. Although I will say I was pretty disappointed that there wasn't more. But overall, I do think you get pretty good mileage for DLC that runs around $12, even though that is a really odd price point. But I think it's fitting here because it's around 4 hours. You do get new content. You do get some really solid boss fights and some really fun boss fights. And you also get different difficulty modes. So I guess in that regard, the DLC is worth it, but only if you are a fan of Wolong. And that is going to do it for this video. So if you like the content, please consider like, sharing, subscribing. It really helps out the channel a lot. If you happen to play the Wolong DLC, tell me how you felt about it. Were you satisfied? Were you dissatisfied? Did you like the boss fights? Did you hate the boss fights? But let me know in the comments below. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.